Hello and welcome to the City of Peoria Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission is composed of volunteer citizens appointed by the City Council. The Commission is the designated hearing body for a range of land use applications, including general plan amendments, rezones, conditional use permits, and amendments to the zoning code. Upon recommendation by the Commission, general plan amendments, rezones, and zoning code amendments proceed forward to the Peoria City Council for final action. For conditional use permits, the Commission will make a final decision subject to appeal. All hearings are conducted in accordance with the rules for procedure requirements to allow an impartial and efficient hearing, and all Commission meetings are open to the public under the Arizona Open Meeting Law. Each case will be called in the order in which it appears on the agenda unless otherwise announced during the meeting. Once called, City staff will give a presentation of the case, followed by a presentation from the applicant if they so desire. After the applicant's presentation, members of the public who have submitted a speaker's request form will be called to speak by the Commission Chair. The applicant may be called to provide additional information, clarification, or a rebuttal. The Commission will discuss the case, may ask additional questions, and take action. Any member of the public wishing to speak must complete a speaker's request form and hand it to the planning assistant at the end of the dais. When speaking, please limit your comments to a maximum of 3 minutes and try not to repeat statements already made by others. We welcome your comments, and as fellow citizens of Peoria, we thank you in advance for your participation.
Greetings. My name is Commissioner Raymond Powell. I would like for us to call our September 18, 2025 Peoria Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday. I would like to start us off with a roll call. All the commissioners will, that rolled off my tongue, a roll call. All the commissioners will indicate their presence once called. Vice Chair Fia Senor, I believe she's on the telephone today.
Nope, I'm online.
All right.
Present.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Cottrell.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Julie Agia. Present. Thank you. Commissioner Fider.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Gaynor.
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum. This is the final call for speaker request forms. If you would like to address the commission tonight, you can get a speaker request form at the entrance. If you weren't able to receive one at the entrance, we have Mrs. Duffy right here on the end, and you can get one from her as well. Thank you. Let's go ahead and roll on to our business. The first item on our agenda is our consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda will be routine in nature and enacted in one motion. Our consent agenda consists of 1C and 2C. 1C, which will be a disposition of absence, and 2C will be our minutes from our August 21st, 2025 meeting. Commissioners, can I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Fider. Could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Properly moved and seconded. Commissioners, could I please get a vote?
Madam Chair, do you ask for a vote from the person on the phone?
Thank you. My fellow commissioner reminded me that we do have Commissioner Fia Senor on the phone. And Commissioner Fia Senor, since we cannot see your vote, would you please indicate your vote for the consent agenda?
Approved.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, all vote. I think we're ready. Thank you. Thank you. That has been properly moved and seconded. Let's move on to our new business for tonight. Tonight we have majority of what we will be doing will be a study session. And so we do have item 3R to accurately inform our community. 3R will be middle housing, which is a code amendment. This will be a study session today, so no action. Staff, please present.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Seated to my left is Elias Valencia. He's going to
assist us in the presentation. So I'll provide an overview, and then I'll ask Elias to walk us through the bill, the high-level part of the bill. So this next item, this pertains to a bill signed by the governor last year, pertaining to what is termed middle housing. You may recall back in May, we provided the commission with a high-level overview. This last Tuesday night, I was in front of council. We provided the council with a overview as part of a study session. So the purpose of the study session tonight, this is to walk through the bill with the commission to kind of do a deeper dive. I'll tell you ahead of us, so on October 2nd, we'll come back to the commission with a first reading. We'll show you what the draft language looks like, and we'll run through the draft language with the commission and get your input on that. And then on the 16th of October, then we'll come back and we'll present the final reading of the bill and ask for a recommendation from the commission. So in your packet, you have a copy of the House Bill 2721, which is, again, is termed the Middle Housing Bill. We also, in your packet, we provided a copy of a briefing sheet. So we attempted to break down the bill into bite-sized pieces to look at. As we talk through this item, I think one of the things you'll see is that this is largely a preemptive bill, meaning that there are a lot of requirements that are placed upon the jurisdiction to input into their city code. And there's actually, as you read through it, very little discretion that is for the city for consideration. As an aside, we've talked about legislative actions in the past, and so one of the things we are working on is working to get our legislative officer here to talk about the legislative process and how we can be effective in deliberating on those items. Okay, so just as a matter of introduction, during the 56th legislative session, which was back in 2024, there were several bills dropped that targeted housing and zoning. Now, collectively, we believe there are perceptions about the lack of housing diversity and affordability that fueled the discussion. So these were really all also preemptive bills as well. As we looked at these, I mean, many of us would argue that the one-size-fits-all is not always the best approach, right? Certainly what may be appropriate in Tucson may not be appropriate in Peoria. And it just goes to the point that local decisions are typically made, are better made at the local level. At any rate, we had several code changes forwarded last year for adoption. So on the screen, you'll probably recognize the top four, the multifamily adaptive reuse, accessory dwelling units. All of those were brought to you last year. We had to have those in place by January 1st of 2025, and that was all accomplished. So during this bill cycle, middle housing had a deadline of January 1st, 2026. So this bill was really, for us, was deferred until this calendar year. So we've been working on this over the last year. But we are on track to have this completed by the first of the year. All right, just to get into a little more detail here. HB 2721, this was, the primary sponsor was Representative Carbone. This was largely a bipartisan bill. It was approved by both the House and Senate by a pretty wide margin. It was signed by the governor in 2024 as well, and I believe it was fueled by the perception that this medium density housing type that we'll talk about tonight that is not being built, and the perception was perhaps that zoning codes are overly restrictive. And so the attempt was to look to cities to be more expansive in how they address this type of housing. And so when we talk about middle housing, so if you look at the graphic here, it's a continuum, and at the far left you're looking at detached single-family housing, and as you go to the right, the level of density or intensity and the housing type changes until the far right you get to more of that urban scale, multifamily, multi-story housing types. So the missing middle, as they call it, really refers to the housing types that occupy the middle ground. And they include things like townhomes, triplexes, fourplexes, that perhaps can be compatible with single family or provide opportunities for affordability. So then, as I mentioned, this bill seeks to expand the supply, or requiring local jurisdictions to be more expansive in how they address this housing type. All right, so we're going to now get into the discussion. I'm going to ask Elias to lead us through that part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Jaquez. Madam Chair, members of the commission, thank you for having us here tonight. It's a joy to be able to speak on this topic again. It's been more than a few months since May. Our director mentioned that last time we spoke on it, but we have been making some progress and legwork in that avenue. But to what Mr. Jaquez brought out, what the extent of this middle housing, what is it? Well, the bill defines it for us already, and I won't get into reading that entire paragraph there, but it basically can wind down to duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhouses, which are a shared wall, row houses. Sometimes they're called and defined as that. But really, more so is this middle housing concept of it not being visible, or that it's missing, that developers are not building that. I just wanted to touch base really quick here that in the city of Peoria, from the entire city, from South Peoria all the way to North Peoria, our zoning ordinance has allowed the flexibility for developers to do a wide variety of products that could be termed as middle housing, such as auto court clusters. They have Z lots. They have modified setbacks to allow a more medium density, even though it's still traditionally viewed as single-family residential. Some of those projects that I just wanted to call out here in the subdivisions are Pinecrest here in South Peoria. We have Camino al Lago that has those written in their PCD narrative. Vistancia has Z lots and auto courts that are designed in their PCD. And even Saddleback has cluster home guidelines that have been written in their PCD narrative. So just to clarify again, as far as the city doing everything they can to promote flexibility of the products and housing availability, we have been hitting that on the nail for years, decades without this mandate. But the case before us today is we are being directed to do something preemptively now by the state. So this is the methodology that staff has come up with on how we're going to apply it to our city and our jurisdiction so that we are in compliance. So again, a little bit on that. What makes a site eligible for middle housing? Well, the state did say that any jurisdiction with a population of 75,000 residents or more, which includes us, the city of Peoria, would have to allow for middle housing. Now, there are two, and it has to allow middle housing, sorry about that, as a permitted use. What this is saying is that we cannot treat middle housing any different than we would a single-family residential lot. So in the city, when we allow single-family residential, there are two methods that permit that. There is the method of a plot plan that's done through a building permit on an already subdivided portion, or if you're creating a housing development with multiple lots, we do that through a plat process to subdivide the land and then to allow each of those lots to be individually constructed. So we would have to allow middle housing using those same mechanics, either a plot plan or a plat. Now that's been hammered out here, the two scenarios that the bill is allowing middle housing to happen in. Scenario one, all lots that are zoned single-family residential within 1 mile of the city's central business district. So this is going to lead to some clarification on what is a central business district. Well, typically those are areas that have been designed that focus on the people, the goods, the economic services that are available. In 2020, the city did designate the Peoria Sports Complex, P83, as its central business district. So for the sake of this bill and how we're applying the applicability of the CBD, it would be 1 mile from the P83 Sports Complex. Now, as far as being zoned single-family residential, staff also had to analyze, well, what do they mean by single-family residential? The bill language clearly states those lots that are zoned single-family residential. In our zoning ordinance, we do have single-family residential zones, the R16, R18, all those R categories. One of the determinations that had to be made was, would this include planned area developments or planned community developments? Because many of those allow just single-family residential. Well, those aren't necessarily zoned single family residential. Those are special overlays that then allow those type of uses to happen within it. So because of that, staff has determined that single family residential would not apply to the PADs or PCDs. There are two other zoning designations, the SR designations that do allow single family residential as a primary use. So taking that into consideration, they were incorporated into the analysis of single family residential. And the map on the right, you will see all those single family zones within the 1 mile of the Peoria Sports Complex that have been colored on the map. Just so that you can see about how much land are we talking about, how many lots are impacted here within the city of Peoria. And it's roughly about 2,200 lots at last count. So it's quite a small number of lots compared to the city at large.
Just to add to that and put a finer point, so as Elias mentioned, you're looking at a graphic 1 mile radius of the P83 Central Business District. So to his point, when you look at the areas that are colored that are zoned single family, and you do a deep dive into those specific parcels, the vast majority of them are already developed with single family homes, right? There are probably a few vacant lots there. So we would say that in this scenario, we have very minimal exposure for middle housing. Now, there is the possibility that somebody could, tear down a single family house and replace it with a duplex. That is something that would be permissible in this bill. And so in that fashion, as Elias mentioned, we would have to allow it as a permitted use, meaning we could not bring it back for a public hearing or a use permit. We would have to allow it outright and then just judge the conformance to the zoning code. So I just wanted to make that point as it applies to that first scenario.
Thanks for clarifying that, Mr. Acas. And Madam Chair, members of the committee, there's the second scenario that the bill language also requires the city to take into account. That would be 20% of any new development that have 10 contiguous acres or more. So one of the items that is not clearly defined in the bill language is what is meant by 20% of new development. So looking at model language ordinance and also with our local peers and other jurisdictions, we've attained that 20% would be related to the total area. So not the unit count, but the amount of area. So if somebody did have a 10-acre project that's being considered for development, they would have the option to allow up to 20% or 2 acres of that development to accommodate middle housing. And also to clarify, those projects would not be limited to just the 1 mile range of the CBD at that point. That would be permissible citywide. But as far as new developments of 10 contiguous acres or more, there isn't a lot of that type of development that's happening for a straight single family residential zoning category. Most of the development that does come in of that size opts to come in as a planned area development or a planned community development based off of the flexibility that is offered through that tool as well. And most of the state land, as we continue to develop that, we're working closely with the state to work on planned area development or planned community development narratives as well. So the impact, although it is possible that there are going to be some developers that want to do a straight zone of single family residential, the reality is most of all of these requests that come in have been coming in as a PAD or a PCD.
Just to add a little bit more to that too. So as we look forward, as Elias mentioned, we probably have limited exposure on this scenario as well. But we have to understand in areas where we have vacant land, to the extent somebody comes in and they have over 10 contiguous acres and they want to rezone it to single family, we just have to recognize that certainly in the future, a portion of that could become available for middle housing. So we just have to understand that when we have projects come in for rezone.
So now that we know where the middle housing can apply, there are some exemptions that have been written into the bill language. And those include unincorporated areas, which obviously we wouldn't be handling because they're out of our jurisdiction. Areas that are not zoned residential, which we understand also they're not allowing single family residential. But areas that don't have services such as sewer or water. And then there's a term thrown in the language also that is undefined as urban services. Now, that could mean electrical and waste services, but it's not clearly defined. So if requests were to come in, that's one of those areas where we would look to the services that would be considered urban to see do they meet the intent of providing those services, and if they don't have them, then again they would be exempted from qualifying through middle housing. There's also the military vicinity that is exempt, that would exempt them, and the Luke Air Force Base does have a range that extends 10 miles to the north, south, and west of it, and 4 miles to the east. And the map there on the right, you can see the dotted ant line, the dark black line there. That indicates the extent of the Luke Air Force military vicinity, and it basically takes out all of South Peoria from being included. And at this time also, it's not the central business district. So, but this exemption would have also gotten this area out from being included into middle housing. So to clearly identify some of the things that we cannot do as a city, because this is a preemptive bill, the state does state we cannot be more restrictive than we already are for our single family residential lots. We can't restrict height to 1 story. We can't restrict floor area of 50% of floor area ratio. And this is one of those items that, although it's written in the bill language, the city as a whole does not even use that as a development guideline for single family residential. Thus, the city, by not including floor area ratio, is using the existing single family design guidelines and standards, such as our current setback requirements, and those guidelines would be not more restrictive than what we're already using for our single family lots. But I think the biggest one here is with parking, because although the parking provided in single family residential is typically about 2 to 3 spaces per unit, this bill does say that we cannot require more than 1 parking space per unit. So not necessarily per building, but per each of those units, they would be only required to provide 1 parking space. And that is something that we can't do anything further than what the bill has written in there. There's also no criteria that would require the owner to be in any one of those units. So they can rent them or sell them. That's no criteria for the owner to be there. And there's also some building code and fire code flexibility that's written in, where it doesn't have to comply with the International Commercial Building Code. It only has to meet the IRC, the International Residential Code criteria. So the big takeaway from tonight's presentation is that this is a preemptive bill, and they did give us a deadline that we have to have middle housing accommodations in our ordinance by January 1st of this coming year, 2026. If we don't, there is a clause written in there. It's basically a penalty clause for failure to meet these criteria, would then allow middle housing on every single family lot in the city of Peoria without limitation. That could mean no zoning control with our setbacks or our height limitations or any of those criteria. So there is a heavy trade-off here for not meeting that deadline. The good news, we are well on track to meet that deadline. As Mr. Hawk has mentioned, we're going to be back here on October 2nd for with the draft language for you to work through. Hopefully we can then get a recommendation 2 weeks after that on October 16th. But for folks that wanted to keep following this process and see where are we at, we have been updating the website with the information. The briefing sheet has been available, as well as the draft language for the bill. And we will be uploading draft language as staff has it finalized at the time for the study session. All of that will be there at that website indicated on the slide. Yeah, I did give a rundown of the meetings that we will be having in quick succession. But with your recommendation, then we would be at council on November 18th, and that would be a date before January 1st, 2026. So that's the goal, to hit that timeline so that we can be in compliance and continue to zone and provide the products and flexibility that we have while also meeting those state criteria. How do I go back? With that, do the commission have any questions for us?
Thank you, Mr. Valencia, for this in-depth study session and presentation. We'll definitely be following. Commissioners, do we have any questions?
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. The county islands that are sprinkled throughout this particular map, does the county have the same issues that we're going to have?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fighter, so this bill, that was one of the exceptions. It would not apply to county islands. And also to answer that additionally is, this bill applies to jurisdictions over 75,000. So it does not apply to the county islands.
County would classify under that, but if it
But it does not apply to
specifically
county
excludes
islands.
county islands?
Correct, yep.
Okay, and then the one comment that we talked about, or just briefly noted on, was obviously we're very limited here on lots that are exposed to this particular issue. If you were to demolish a single-family home, what's the maximum that they can could be put on that site without any public process? Is it go from a single-family home now to duplex, or is there what's the max density that you can potentially entertain? Like what's like the worst case scenario here?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fighter, so firstly, you would have to be within that 1 mile radius of PED3, right?
Sure, I'm talking on this map, right? That's very
Correct, and
helpful.
so once you demolish your home, how much you put on that, you can put anything from a duplex to a fourplex, but that's all dependent upon meeting setback requirements, and a lot of the lots that are within that 1 mile radius are smaller, so I would be highly skeptical if they could meet, a fourplex, for example. Somebody would have to probably have a much bigger lot or consolidate lots to be in a position to do that, because they got to meet setback requirements and our lot coverage requirements. Does that answer your question?
What was the last one?
Lot coverage.
Lot coverage.
Yep.
Okay. What is our lot coverage max right now?
The lot coverage, depending on the zoning district, but it varies from, I want to say, 45 to 50%.
Most of our standard zoning districts are 45% or below. When we get into PADs and PCDs, they typically range a little bit higher, the idea being there was trade-offs at the time of that entitlement document.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Thank you. Commissioner Cottrell, and afterwards we will have Commissioner Gaynor. Thank you.
Thank you. Couple questions. First is the requirement that you cannot use commercial code. So could you answer, if I was going to go and build an apartment complex right now, 10 units, 20 units of one big building, if I'm not misunderstanding, that would require commercial code and that would require sprinklers right now. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Control, likely, although we're not, that isn't our expertise in the building code. I would really have to defer to them. What this provision says specifically is for these housing types, we could not require the
Just for those.
compliance with the international commercial code.
And with kind of tied in with that, does this, and I don't see the language in the statute, does it prevent in that same scenario where you're tearing down your one house, assume you have enough land, it's a big lot, does it prevent multiple of these? So I'm going to build 2 fourplexes, 3 fourplexes, basically make it look like an apartment complex. Does it force us to allow that, assuming that the lot is big enough?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Control, I don't believe, I believe the limiting factors are really, it gets down to setbacks and lot coverage and those minimum provisions that we have in there.
Okay. So it's
So
not necessarily.
theoretically, if you had enough land,
Right.
you could, right?
Okay, so it's not tied to one lot, and the most you could get is 4 units in a fourplex. I could do multiple fourplexes, and I could get however many I could fit and meet all the other setbacks and lot coverages.
I believe that's the case, but allow me to kind of run some clarification down that question.
Okay. And then the last one, this might be more of what your preference is, and I'm seeing not within this 1 mile radius, someplace else in the city, with no PAD, somebody comes in with that 10-acre or bigger development. And obviously, they would normally come in with a PAD with that. Would you discourage them from saying, within my 10-acre PD, I'm going to build 2 acres of this type of product, knowing that if you said no, they could just go for straight zoning and do it anyway? Is there, I mean, what is your gut as what the city would prefer there?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cottrell, that's a tough question because sometimes we have scenarios where somebody comes in with a zoning case and a site plan and that property gets entitled, but maybe the what's conceptualized on the site plan doesn't come to fruition, right? And then it gets sold and gets sold again, and then that future buyer then they're sitting on property over 10 acres that is zoned single family.
Right.
They could have the option to go do some middle housing there.
Do you think you would see PADs come in with 8 acres of traditional single family with 2 acres of middle housing of some type?
We actually see very, very few straight zoning districts, almost the vast majority.
As a PAD though, would you see that?
Correct. Yeah, in fact, North Peoria is almost exclusively PADs and PCDs.
Right,
And then
right.
the land that's not developed, as you know, most of that land is under the ownership of the State Land Department. We're
Right.
working with them to do some master planning.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was thinking that you would see more of that as developers buy it and sell it off, and
Yeah.
now you have straight zoning for right now, waiting for a PAD or not.
That's possible, yep.
Chair and Commissioner, to put a finer point in your question, you're asking if a PAD can have multiple housing types on there. We would not discourage a PAD for having different housing types. In fact, some of the communities that Elias mentioned are master planned and they are sized enough and they have multiple products within there. So it's not that staff would restrict housing types within PADs. When we're doing our analysis, we're going to ensure, similar to what we do now, that they're within the character, or they're located, they have services, there's amenities for the residents. And I think we do a far better job in that scenario, allowing and using the tools that we have in place, rather than coming back in and forcing something into an existing neighborhood, or forcing it into a single-family area that would have an expectation of a certain character. So in that regard, we never discourage housing diversity. In fact, the general plan calls for us to encourage housing diversity. And so that's what we're looking at when we're doing that analysis.
Thank you. I was trying to get a sense of how much of Peoria's authority is the state taking away. And it doesn't seem like very much here, because we were already doing it anyway.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Cottrell, I think our assessment overall is limited exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cottrell. Commissioner Gaynor?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. So, as it relates to HOAs, does the state override any HOA rules?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gaynor. So the various preemptive bills that have been passed have been inconsistent in this one facet, in that some bills address HOAs. This bill does not. Doesn't say anything about the bill. So if, what it does say, though, is does not change existing development agreements, whatever that may entail, right? We have some larger developments that have development agreements that are attached with that, but it's silent when it comes to HOAs. So I would say, as a matter of city, if somebody tore down a home in an HOA, as a city matter, we would have to allow the duplex if it fit on that lot. But if the HOA has a restriction against that, then that's really a private matter that would have to be dealt with through the CC&Rs. That would not be a city matter.
Okay, thanks for that. So we're going to be expecting expecting a lot of litigation, I'm certain. That answered.
Yeah, I was just gonna parlay that. I mean, we're
Commissioner Freider.
exposing ourselves to problems. Is it possible to address that, the HOA issue, because it's not specifically called out? Do we have the ability to say, hey, this doesn't take away the rights of an HOA to enforce their, do we have that authority to do that? Because people buy in an HOA for a reason. They want to have conformity to the neighborhood.
Yep, Madam Chair, Commissioner Feder, good question. I mean, the bill is silent in terms of that issue and what we can regulate. I don't mean to put the city attorney on the spot. I don't know if you have any guidance on that issue. We can certainly look into it and explore that with our city attorney's office.
I would be welcoming to that.
Okay.
That concept.
Hop on in. Maybe the city attorney has some comments or clarification.
Members, no comments at this time, other than we'll research it and look into that.
Thank you. I still have some more questions, Madam Chair. It's okay. Thanks. I mean, HOA is an important clarification. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discovery. In any case, will there be an ability for our residents or our community to appeal a decision? I mean, it's sounding like it's not going to come to us. It's just going to kind of happen, right? So if a resident appeals a decision because they don't like the two-story house or the duplex that's going up in front of their house, what do they have any hope of getting clarification on that or satisfaction on that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gaynor, I'll give you a direct answer on that one. The answer to that question is no.
Okay.
If you have a qualifying lot that meets the requirements in the bill, as this portion mentions, it's a permitted use outright. So if they can demonstrate that they meet the requirements in the code, there is no public hearing. It doesn't come to commission. There is no discretionary action. We have to grant the permit if they meet the requirements.
Okay, thank you. That's great clarification. I expected that, but I want to ask it. And then, let's see, I had on the lot coverage. So it's 45% or 50% or whatever that number is. Is that enclosed coverage, or are patios, open patios included, pergolas, et cetera?
Chair, Commissioner Gaynor, thank you. So with lot coverage, it would be anything under roof. We do have some provisions within our code that address things like, I believe we refer to them as open air structures. So if you have louvers or a lattice cover, in those situations, there's the opportunity to reduce the lot coverage by 50% because it's considering that you're not really covering the whole area. But by and large, anything that's under a roof member would be considered a part of the lot coverage.
Okay, thank you.
Are you all done? All good?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gaynor. Any other commissioners? Thank you, staff. I did have two clarification questions, and it may just be an elaboration. So two things that really stood out to me was the map, right? It said it was an exemption of South Peoria. I just want to know the rationale behind that. I live in South Peoria. Just kind of want to elaborate on the rationale because I think it's this map. Yeah, you guys showed an exemption, and I just would love to know what the rationale was behind that.
Madam Chair, members of the commission. So because the bill language writes in that exemption that within the military vicinity, that's what the identifying factor was. So that was mapped out and it did exclude that portion of the city.
Okay, so just the vicinity of the military airport is what they were looking at. Okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's a defined term in state statute, and as applies to Luke Air Force Base, it does have a very specific parameter. So in the judgment of the legislature, when they wrote the bill, they said we were going to exempt these areas as defined from those requirements.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Planning Director Hawkes, and then Mr. Valencia. One more question. This was a clarification on the 20% of new development that this would apply to. Would you elaborate on 20%, why it was exactly 20%? I think there was a number that was called out, correct?
Madam Chair, members of the commission. So that 20%, the way that it's written in the bill language says that at least 20% has to be offered as a of the overall acreage. So that wasn't language that staff chose or decided on, that we're going to use 20% as a figure, and this was directly written in the bill.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I just want some elaboration for the public so that they know that this was already in HB, I believe HB 2721, and it wasn't just us, because this, from what I see, there's not a lot of control here for us since this is coming down from the ledge.
That's correct. And so as Elias had mentioned, the ambiguity here is when we talk about 20%, 20% of what, right? 20% of the land area, 20% of the unit count. And so in conferring with our colleagues in other jurisdictions and the League of Cities, we've determined that we should look at 20% of the land area of that development area.
Okay, all right, perfect. I just want to make sure that we're being as clear as possible, because questions will come, and we're in a study session, so I figured I'd ask those questions. Thank you so much, staff. Any other commissioners have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Cottrell?
This isn't a question, but it's kind of a comment. As I see this, and I just went through this with my father-in-law's house, which is in Phoenix, the Arcadia area, if you know it. Lots of 1 acre parcels, beautiful, old, and the zoning is straight zoning. And so 1 house per acre, per half acre. And the zoning allows two-story houses. And they're going down, getting torn down and rebuilt like crazy. And I could see that that's kind of the intent here. And it changes the character of the neighborhood, absolutely, but it's not entirely a bad thing. We've seen it, we've seen all these, a third of the houses in his neighborhood are gone, but it's kind of an improvement. They're newer, there's some benefits too, so it's not all doom and gloom, even though the state's taking the keys out of our hands and forcing us to do it. That's all.
Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Cottrell. I think it's important that we do elaborate on those, so thank you. Staff, do you all have anything else on this specific study session and report?
No, ma'am, we don't.
I have one last question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We talked about currently zoned single family, you can go up to 1 to 4 units based upon lot coverage and setbacks. Is there a cap at 4 units? Like if there's a big lot, could you get more than 4 units on it?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fighter, so that's the one question I think was asked earlier that we're going to get some clarification on.
Okay.
I believe there's not. So if somebody was to consolidate some lots, right, and if they could meet all those requirements, I don't think there is a cap on the.
There's no cap on units as long as the other requirements are met.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, yes, thank you. That's actually a good question, Commissioner Fighter. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Valencia. I think we will be moving on to our next item on the agenda, which will be 4R, which is our development workshop series. Staff, please present.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. This next one is one of a series of workshops that we want to have with the commission, and they're planned over the next several sessions. And so, as you know, when you all join the commission, we do a quick introductory session. We talk about the different case types, but it's very high level. There's a lot of information thrown at you. And we thought there would be some value in taking a deeper dive into some of these topics. These are case types that come before the commission. Some of these topics have some legal and regulatory nuances that distinguish themselves from one another. And so, for example, how we assess a conditional use permit and the level of discretion we have is very different than how we look at rezones, right? Also, which are legislative actions. Similarly, even with conditional use permits, there are legal nuances and preemptions when we talk about wireless facilities, right? So that would be a future session we want to have with you on that. So tonight, what we're going to do is we'd like to have a discussion with you about conditional use permits. We're going to run through how we look at it, what is our parameters that we review it in front of, and what does the process look like. So in the forthcoming meetings, we would like to take a deeper dive into wireless facilities. That would be the next meeting is our plan to talk about those. We'd also like to explore rezones and also other topics that are not regulatory that maybe pertain to economic development. We'd like to invite them in. Also, I mentioned earlier our InterGov, having that person come in and help not only staff, but help all of us demystify the legislative process, how bills come about, almost like what was that show in the 70s at Schoolhouse Rock, right? How that all works. Because sometimes it's a little confusing when you have a bill that it goes away, then it comes back as a striker. So having a little more information on how that all comes about and how we can all collectively be most effective in that process. So tonight I'll be assisted with Lori Deaver and Cody Gleason as well as we move through this. But really want this portion of the study session to be very interactive. So if you have any questions, feel free to stop us in the middle of the presentation. All right, so we're going to start with what is a conditional use. I think as a starting point, it's instructive to step back and let's talk about zoning. So zoning, of course, refers to local regulations that govern how real property can and cannot be used in certain geographic areas. So this is a form of police power that we have that's been conferred to the local governmental entity. So at its base level, the idea for zoning is to allow or to facilitate orderly and the orderly growth and development of the city and prevent incompatible land uses. So to give you an egregious example, of course, you wouldn't want to have let's say a prison or a power station next to a single family home. So that's at very root point, the purpose of zoning. So as you know, we have zoning in the city. Think single family and commercial and industrial, mixed use. We have different types of these different zoning districts throughout the city. Now, when council adopts a zoning district, they are taking a legislative action. Land uses in that zoning action, they could be permitted outright, they could be permitted with conditions, they could be a conditional use, or not permitted at all. But once the council has taken action, they have decided on the appropriateness and the level of discretion on a land use type. So a conditional use then is essentially, it's an allowed use under the zoning, but by virtue of its physical and operational characteristics at a specific location, at a specific context, it may require additional scrutiny and limiting conditions to address any adverse impacts that it may have. So while you find conditional uses throughout all zoning districts, typically they're businesses is what we see. So we allow conditional uses in residential districts, but most often you find them in business, commercial, and industrial districts. And many times they are already subject to certain siting characteristics in the zoning code. But as a matter of a CUP, they may be required due to the distance of one use to another. Its proximity to residential might qualify it as a conditional use. The type of business certainly would dictate if it's a certain conditional use or not, or what is commonly seen as the intensity of that specific use. So those are things that usually put it within that category. So when assessing the classifications of a land use in the code, as I mentioned, uses can be permitted outright. They might have stated limitations in the code, so while they're permitted outright, they might already have some limiting regulations that apply to that one. Or they can be permitted as a conditional use permit. As I mentioned, they warrant additional attention, and they do come to the commission in the form of action that this body takes. We'll talk through the process later in the presentation, but if there is community interest, they would require a neighborhood meeting as part of that process. So why a conditional designation in the code? As I mentioned, there may be characteristics of that land use, the way it behaves, the way it operates, that may require limitations. So we look at the physical or operational characteristics. We'll break that down a little bit. We look at how does this use influence traffic or adjoining streets, and what is the level of compatibility with adjacent uses. So this is a common, this is a set of common conditional uses that we see throughout the code. Auto repair. So when you think about auto repair, right, there are impacts from auto repair. There's noise that's generated. There's traffic sometimes. Light and glare can be an issue. When you think about car washes, they can be noisy. There's traffic considerations there. Drive-throughs, right? Particularly when you have drive-throughs adjacent to residential, there might be concerns with odor. There might be concerns with hours of operation, right? You have cars in the queuing lane late at night playing music. That can be bothersome to a neighborhood. Light and glare. Daycares, that's a common conditional use. There might be concerns with drop-off times and queuing and how does it interact with that neighborhood. We also have a category in a code called really a series of uses that they're referred to as exception uses. And they include things like tattoo studios, check cashing, plasma, liquor store, and in that set used to include massage parlors. And so where that comes from is years ago, and even predates me, but back in the 90s, there was a sense on the council that if we had a concentration of these exception uses, that it could perhaps lead to blighting conditions. And so the idea was to separate these uses. And so there was a minimum 1,000-foot separation for these uses. They still had to come in with a conditional use as well. In the ensuing time, a lot of things have changed. And so, one of the things that was pulled out of that list of exception uses was massage establishments. There was a feeling that they become more clinical in the last several decades there. So that's no longer part of that list. But this is just to give you an idea of the very common ones that we have. And really, through the conditional use permit, what we're trying to do at root levels, we're trying to facilitate a good neighbor policy. How can we maximize compatibility among uses? So common tactics that we have used, that we've brought forward in the form of recommendations, they might be limiting operational hours. We've had that in the past. Could be an expanded buffer behind a use, right? We could densify the tree count in that area. It could be a change in the location or orientation of a specific site element that might help mitigate an impact. It could be enhanced security, lighting that's placed, or could be hostile vegetation. We've seen that to kind of discourage that access in some areas. Or it could be the imposition of a sound wall. So those are all common things we look at if we're trying to mitigate a certain circumstance there. But it's important to recognize the CU tactics are after the use has been established. So where we have the most influence is really at the point of zoning. When somebody comes in for a zoning change, that's where we have the most influence. Often when we see a PAD or PCD, that's a tailored type of zoning district. We have the ability, as we're reviewing the case, we can certainly modify the development standards. We can certainly look at the use schedule that's proposed, and we can make recommendations to modify that use schedule, all with the idea of trying to bring forward a rezone or a development that is most compatible with what's around it. Now, once zoning is established, that's where it gets more challenging, because we can't just arbitrarily deny that property right, and it is a property right. We would have legal exposure in those cases. So sometimes we've had questions from constituents after zoning's already been established, right, and it's on that property. Can't you just turn this use down? Can't you just decide that we don't want it here? Why can't you do something about it? And the idea there is that property owner already has a property right. We can't arbitrarily just take that person's property right away. Our job at that point is to determine, does this use meet all the standards and requirements that have already been put in place? And if they do, we're obligated to approve that case. All right, enough out of me. I think I'm going to turn it over to Lori now.
All right. Good evening, Commission. So kind of building on what Chris is talking about, I'll be getting into the process and doing a deeper dive on some of the aspects included within that. But again, let's be clear in starting with the premise that the uses are allowed. They're considered normal and complementary. And it's only because of those physical characteristics or the type of use that we're looking at additional scrutiny on there, because they have the potential to impact adjacent properties. So one of the key things that we want to identify, and perhaps is lost on folks, that our focus and parameter is limited, but it's significant and important. So two things. We're ensuring that all of the applicable CUP and special limitations, whether it be within the zoning ordinance or the PAD or PCD, that we've checked the box, we've looked at it, and we've taken care of it. We also look to mitigate and offset potential adverse impacts to the maximum extent practical. And that's a key point on that. So to put a finer note, maximum extent practical. Not to say that we're eliminating the potential nuisance, but we're going to mitigate it to the maximum extent practical. And sometimes that will come up when we have the conversations and comments from the residents, and we'll touch on that later. But this should be a graphic that some of our commissioners have seen, but it's worth also for those who might be watching online and in the audience to kind of unpack the process of a conditional use permit. And I know we saw the video tonight in the opening, but sometimes the nuance is kind of missed in there. CUPs are different than rezoning when we're doing the process. So let's unpack that a little bit. So pre-applications. These are primarily businesses coming into the city. And before they even come into the city, we're asking them, don't sign a lease, come to the city, have the conversation to see if the use is allowed. We often do that through a pre-app process. And in that process, we tell them in that meeting, we tell them what's the process, the timelines, what to expect, and we go through and we lay it out. Once they submit, the clock is ticking for the city. And I want to focus on the orange area in particular. From a city review standpoint, this is our first chance to go through and see whether they've met all the requirements or not. If they haven't, we're providing a review letter back to them. Please address these things. Often that could be, please make modifications to your site plan, please look at maybe tree density, please look at your wall location, etc. Please take a look at the traffic and analysis and do X, Y, and Z. Normally, we'll go back and forth with the applicant 2 to 3 reviews before it even comes to commission. One of the complaints we've heard is, I'm a business, I've got to get going. You know, how quickly can I go through the process? Our set time frame and our target time frame is 35 days per review. Some of these are mom and pops. Some of these are skilled folks that we see time and time again. We try to assist them to get the information that we need as quickly as possible and get them to the hearing process. Now, once that application comes in, there's what we call a notice of application postcard. Big 6x9 postcard goes out in the radius that you see, and it's the first chance that if there's a concern by the neighborhood, they reach out. If they provide opposition or concerns, that's the trigger to staff. If it's in within 21 days, applicant needs to hold a meeting. And it is the applicant's meeting, but they need to explain and have the conversation with their neighbors as to what is the expectation of the business, how it's going to go in, how it's going to operate, and see if they can have that dialogue at that point in time. Now, CUPs can be both two things. It could be a new business in a new shell building, or it can be a tenant improvement. So keep that in mind. We often do not have opposition or neighborhood reaching out to us, but in those instances, when they do, we're having the neighborhood meeting and we're having the conversation. So this is going on simultaneously as the city is doing their review. So neighborhood meeting, check. We've gotten all of the city staff comments taken care of, check. Notice of hearing gets sent out. Same radius, everything. So now it comes before Planning Commission. And here's the key difference. As Chris talked about, City Council is the land use authority, and they've already made the call that the use is allowed subject to the conditions. So really, Commission in this case is doing a quality control check on whether staff has mitigated to the extent possible all of the conditions that may be of a concern. Have we looked at the concerns? Have we mitigated to the best extent possible? Have we checked all of those boxes? And in that case, we're ready to go. We're going to be recommending approval. If they haven't checked the boxes, that's where staff then says, no, we're going to be recommending denial, and here's why. Or, but it comes down to commission, because you have the ability to approve what changes, continue, or deny a case. So, if for some reason you think, staff, you're getting a little hard, you know, you guys, they did their job, we can approve it, but we just need this additional condition in there, that's possible too. Or continue, get additional information, so on. But the wild card is there's an appeal process, and we're going to talk through that because normally we don't have that conversation with commission. So I'll touch on that in a few minutes. So really, commission is a quality control check whether we've done our homework and we have presented the best application forward. So let's talk about the review criteria. In the packets, you'll normally see, and it's kind of standard across the board, specific CUP criteria that we always talk about. Depending on the use, you're going to have special limitations in there. Could be a wide variety of items, including, but those are the things that usually the staff provides in italics and the applicant's response as to how they meet those regulations. Chris has touched on some of the things that we look at for regulatory controls. Access restrictions, meaning how many driveways, what's the turning movements, spacing requirements, distance away from business to business, quantity limits, think gas stations, where you have the number on the corner. We can be looking at open space, landscape buffers, etc. These are all inbound items that we can look at. When we step outside of these regulatory controls, we're getting into some really gray area, and it gets subjective at that point. So we want to make sure that when we're putting a control in place, that it's quantitative and not subjective. So who can put conditions of approval on a case? First and foremost, staff, as we're going through the process, will add what we think is necessary to mitigate. Secondly, Planning and Zoning Commission can add a condition of approval. So some thoughts when these conditions are being put into place. They have to be based on applicable city regulations. The bigger one is they cannot be arbitrary or capricious. We need to have, the city has to have legal authority and capability and competency to enforce the condition. We have to have the expertise. It has to be within our authority. If it's state regulated, if it's a state concern, city does not have legal authority in that case. It's a state issue and not a city issue. And then finally, it must be the minimum action necessary to mitigate the potential concern to the extent practical. We're not able to get heavy-handed on it. It needs to be the minimum action that's required to take care of the issue. So some things to think about.
Laura, if I may just add to that, that third bullet point is really important because at the end of the day, when we approve a use permit with conditions, we have to have the ability to confirm that they're operating within the bounds of those conditions. If we don't have that legal authority or that capability, and we're unable to really enforce that condition, then it becomes problematic.
All right, key findings. There's a lot of words on here, and I apologize for that. Normally, we don't put as many words on here, but these are important. These are actually within the code, and these are some of the key findings. When staff is recommending approval, we have to acknowledge that these are the findings that we have agreed with, and all of these are the big ones, but there are actually more in the code. And one of the things that, again, wanted to emphasize, the uses are compatible with adjacent uses. That can get subjective, but we need to be quantitative when we're looking at the application. We're looking at the mitigation and offset to the maximum extent practical. Sometimes we get into the traffic conversations. Facilities and services will be available to serve the subject property while maintaining adequate levels of services for existing development. That's where that traffic conversation comes into. And any significant adverse impacts on the natural environment will be mitigated to the maximum extent possible. You don't normally see that unless it's vacant desert, and then we're going to be looking at that condition. So when staff comes forward with findings, these are all the findings that we have acknowledged. We just summarize them and paraphrase them so that we're not reading them to commission when it's up on the slide on that one. We've had a couple of questions on continuing jurisdiction and the what-if scenarios if we have bad actors. I would say, unlike other jurisdictions, I haven't seen this in my time with Peoria because when we have concerns with businesses, our code enforcement goes out and seeks compliance. They're really good at what they do, and it's education first, and then coming into the carrot and the stick, so to speak. And I think I said 90% last time, but I think you said it was about like 98% compliance right off the bat.
Yep, 98% compliance. That's correct.
So they're really good about working with folks to get them back into alignment and to try to address the concerns. If there was ongoing issues, city staff can take action. We have to initiate a case and bring the application back forward. Not to say that we would revoke, we may modify different ground rules. We may suspend it, we may revoke it. There are options on the table, and depending on the severity of the issue, we would provide a recommendation to commission because the item would come back for commission for review at that point in time. So there's a lot of avenues in which we can mitigate any potential issues. But like I said, over my time frame, and I think to Chris's time frame as well, very few, if any, of these have ever come back to commission for action in that regard. Procedural due process. So this is kind of an extension of some of the items that we talk about during orientation. Adequate public notice. We do use multiple methods to get the word out. Now, I want to be clear, kind of in the zoning cases, we've had folks say that I don't receive notice, and they claim it is a noticing failure. It's not a noticing failure. Just because you didn't receive the notice doesn't mean that the city had a noticing failure, because we send out to the radius. We've identified things happen, mail doesn't occur, but it's not a noticing failure, and it's not a reason to not take action on a case. So next point is opportunity to be heard. We have the neighborhood meeting, we have public hearing. When there is opposition or concern, we do ask that the applicants reach out to those individuals and have the conversation. If the residents are reaching out to us and there's an actionable item, hey, I want a different kind of tree, I want more trees, I want something that's tangible that we can work with, that's what the city wants to hear in those cases, and we'll try to build that in to the review. Agenda placement. We had a great question starting of this year is what's the difference between consent versus regular? If we've not had any opposition, it's been pretty quiet, it's very germane, this is a normal type of case, it will go on consent. If we think it's going to trigger discussion or we've had opposition, you'll see it on regular. So we want to make sure that there's adequate opportunity to have the conversations that we need to have. The packet is put out, so both residents, individuals online, commission, y'all have the ability to see the information as it is presented to commission. And then finally on the slide, let's talk about best practices. We always talk about avoiding the appearance of impropriety. In this case, we always try to be above board. We've talked about open meeting laws and things of that nature. What I would also go and kind of extend into that conversation is before you are making comments to staff, perhaps hold on to those until if there's public to be heard. We don't want to have folks assume the decision is made before the comments are heard. We want to allow them to have their time and have that conversation with commission. We appreciate the comments. If you want to provide those comments after the fact and after the comments are heard, we're welcome to have that conversation. But having that shift in when you're perhaps providing thoughts on where you're going with the case, maybe take a step back, wait till if there's any comments from the public, and then have the conversation afterward. And that way that gives them the ability, to allow them to hear after they've had their chance to be heard. And it's probably more impactful that way. And then lastly, the commission decision is not arbitrary and capricious. So we're looking, and if we're making a decision, It's based on the business type, it's based on the use. You agree it's compatible with us, and we're not kind of deciding, because as we've talked about between zoning cases, in deciding winners and losers between operators, that the decision is fair and just in that regard. So appeals, they do happen. They've been very few, but they have happened.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the previous slide, if you don't mind? You said for it to be interactive, so I'm jumping in. I hear what you're saying about commissioners providing opinions during this open discussion, and I agree with that in most cases. But when a commissioner has a question for an applicant, that question could lead to further discussion or the appearance of a commissioner trying to take it a certain direction, but it's really a commissioner during discovery, right? So, and I know you're not you're making a suggestion to us. You're not telling us what we can and can't do. But I would just, put that on the table, is that sometimes comments and questions lead to further discussion, and we have to, I mean, if I have a doubt about a discussion, a presentation, a case, I'm going to ask that question. And again, sometimes it may sound like I'm leading in a certain direction or a commissioner is leading in a direction, but it's not that at all. It's discovery for the member so that we make a decision based on as much knowledge as we can gather. So I do want to mention that because in my experience, some commissioners do kind of take it a certain direction and they start saying how much they love the project. And I mean, we're speaking openly here, right? And before anybody gets to speak, the staff mentions the case and the commissioner is already making comments on that. So I get that, but it's not going to preclude us from, when we're asking questions, we really jump into discovery to understand the case. That's all I wanted to mention and open it up for.
Chair and Commissioner Gaynor, that is an excellent point. And so I appreciate the clarification. In no way would we ever want to stifle discovery, asking questions, getting the answers that you need in the conversation. It really comes down to the distinction whether you're telegraphing where you're going already before comments have been heard. And so, yes, there's a great distinction there. Thank you.
And I also want to mention, we as commissioners, and I think this commission is extremely respectful, but when we do have an applicant up there or opposition up there, they're like we are, but they're taking time out of their day, right? And I think we really need to be respectful and welcoming of these comments from the people that have made time to come and speak to us, right? So that's also another part of the balance that I think, I don't know if you mentioned it here, or if it's later, or you already mentioned it.
But
it's something that
segue.
I think absolutely has to be mentioned.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Gaynor. In the effort of making this a collaborative effort, I have to agree. But I do think that this is great that staff is presenting it because, as we go on the commission, I do think that returning to the basics, what I like to call them, and being reminded of those is important. And I do think that Commissioner Gaynor made a great point. When we're kind of in an exploratory moment of researching, trying to figure out and asking questions, I know I ask questions as well, that's still being welcome. But I do think that if we have, personal opinions about the project or want to commend, whether it's a developer or whoever is coming before us, I do think that there's a process and a flow in how we should handle these cases to make sure that community engagement is encouraged and that they're heard. Because I think in a time such as this, all of us want to be heard. But I also think that will make our decisions a little bit more concrete because we get to hear everything. And I do think that this is important because we have a certain flow of the meeting. So thank you.
All right, couple more items and then definitely any thoughts and questions on this one. But appeal of commission decision, it does happen on a rare basis, but it does happen. Just know there's two groups that can challenge a commission appeal. The owner of the property or business and any property within the notification radius, the 600 foot, can appeal. The form is online. As you see, we do ask that the appeal be written on the form. It has to be received within the deadline, which is 15 days from the decision. Has to have justification for the appeal. Why was the decision made in error, and what criteria was not met? So when I was talking about those findings, what did we miss? They have to identify what was missed in the decision. Okay, so let's talk about validity. When we receive these, the zoning administrator determines if they're valid or not, and anything valid gets forwarded to council for consideration. Slight change in the code that now ZA needs to make the ruling on the field whether somebody's just grumpy or somebody has a legitimate stake in a claim here. So invalid reasons, and we've seen this a couple of times. They didn't like a council rezoning decision a while ago, and they want to use the CUP decision to go back and contest the zoning. It happened, based on a true story. They don't like that the use is considered conditional and allowed. And so they're contesting the land use decision again and the use itself. Or they don't like the operator, and they will challenge the operator of that business. One of the ones that we will also see is you need to mitigate every concern that we've brought up. You didn't, and therefore it's an incorrect decision by commission. That's an invalid appeal. Again, it's the maximum extent practical when we're mitigating issues. Not fully, not 100%, what is practical. So, valid reasons. If you guys are feeling a little, snarky, and you take it out and you deny an applicant because you don't like the use, that is grounds for a valid ground for appeal. If you get heavy-handed or staff gets heavy-handed in placing those conditions, they can challenge, and it would be a valid reason. So keep that in mind that as we're going through, yes, decision has been made, land use is allowed. We're just trying to mitigate the concerns and be the good neighbor. So going back to that good neighbor policy. But there is due process when we do make an error on there. So key takeaways. Peoria City Council gets to decide the land use classifications. That's what they do day in, day out. So conditional uses are allowed, subject to meeting the applicable criteria and obtaining a conditional use permit. Both conditions of approval and conditions of decisions cannot be arbitrary or capricious. City staff needs the legal authority and capability and competency to enforce the conditions that we do recommend for and approve. And all in all, city maintains continuing jurisdiction, and we've had great success in that regard. So that's it for now. I'm open for any other questions, and fire away.
Thank you so much, Ms. Deaver, for that elaborative report. I definitely think, like I said, this is needed. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Cottrell?
I'm trying to read between the lines and see all the cases that you're thinking of where we did something. But the main question is, if I just lost my train of thought. Has there been instances where a person, an applicant, a neighbor or something has complained about what the commission has said recently that maybe couldn't get appealed or something like that? I mean, is there some backstory here that we're trying to be taught?
No, Madam Chair and members of the commission, there is certainly no message that we're trying to deliver. Really what we're trying to do is we always think it's good practice to come back and do a deep dive into the things that we all consider as part of the commission. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting, there are nuances and legal parameters that we have to just be aware of when we're looking at use permits that are different than rezones, right? And then the next meeting, Cody's going to come back. Sorry, Cody. And he's going to talk, he's our expert on wireless facilities. So he's going to come back and talk about wireless facilities. So how we look at a CUP for wireless facilities is actually different. And there's more limiting characteristics on that one. So it really is just about continuing education.
Thank you, Commissioner Cottrell, and thank you for that explanation, Plan Director Hawkes. As you all know, I am a huge advocate for continued education. I really think life's a university, and when we think that we know it all, there's no way that we can serve this community. That's us as a commission and our planning department, which I know continues their education, which is a requirement. And so I do appreciate that we're doing this because it is important as we continue to grow as a city. Commissioner Gaynor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I could look it up on the website, but what's the cost of an appeal? The cost. What does it cost?
We just modified our fees. Let me see, I'm gonna,
Chair, Commissioner Gaynor, I believe it's now $500.
okay.
Okay. And the appeal process, and I missed it, so help me here. The appeal process is with a commission, with a group of commissioners, or does it go to the, what's the process here?
Chair, Commissioner Gaynor, it goes back to City Council.
So the council's the appeals board. Okay.
They are the final referee on the ruling.
And that decision, I haven't been through that process here, so I'm just trying to learn also. That decision, once it's made, is final, and the council can set precedents and change things to satisfy the appeal or not. I mean, when the council makes a decision based on how the appeal is heard, can they make a decision that takes the decision out of current code?
Chair-
You understand what I'm trying to ask?
Chair, Commissioner Gaynor,
The
I
law
think
is such and such, they make a decision that supersedes or overrules the law. Can they do that?
the focus of the City Council review is whether the decision was made incorrectly, and if there was something that was missed within the key findings, that something different should have been made. So it is a check on commission. It's not a full reevaluation of the case. It is whether something has been improperly decided and why. They do have the ability to make modifications, but most often when these have gone to City Council, they have concurred with Commission's findings.
Okay, so thank you for the modifications. Can those modifications set a precedent or change something that's already on the books?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, they can modify a condition that the commission or staff may have placed on that. So what they're doing, and I'll tell you, in my years here, I've been here 26 years, we've had 2 appeals. So they don't happen very often. What they can do, and really as a matter of practice, the appeal should be nearly tailored to the appeal that's been brought up. If somebody comes in and says, you know, there wasn't a big enough buffer, it shouldn't be 20 feet, it should be 30 feet. Well, council could certainly side with the appellant on that one.
Okay, thank you. I'm not trying to complicate things. When I was on the Board of Adjustments, we had 10 cases a month in Phoenix. So, and then I agree with the training comment. I think this is great. I think it's amazing that we can get a refresh like this. It's I think very positive and very helpful. And my final question is, if an applicant doesn't get the result they want from council during the appeal, can they appeal to any other body? Can they appeal that decision? Because in other cities, the Board of Appeals, the Board of Adjustment, if they make a decision and the client doesn't agree with that decision, they can take it to the Court of Appeals, right? Is that something that can be done?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, so the council, they act as the final arbiter on the appeal. However, things can always be referred to this, Superior Court. They can always take it to that next level.
Okay. All right. Again, my last question, I don't mean to complicate things, but I wanted to make it a little funner.
All right.
All right, so closing statements. No, we're not implying any negative vibes here. This is a continuing education. It's best practice. Conditional use permits are often confused by our residents in terms of what the differences is. So this is actually also an opportunity for members of our public to get more of an understanding behind the scenes of what the ground rules are when we have a CUP. So again, no nefarious items on that one. If there are topics that commission would like for us to add, if you have questions, you can think about it. Feel free. You can say it now if you've got it, or you can email it to Chris or myself, and we're happy to take that under consideration and continuing to build on these.
Madam Chair, I have one last question. I'm sorry. I said it was my last question, but this is really my last question. So when we have a question that begs for, legal interpretation, or we're assuming we understand something and we want to ask, further clarification or whatever, can we then turn to the city attorney or to the attorney or the board attorney? Who do we turn to when we have legal questions during a hearing? And again, it may never happen, but who can we turn to?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, on the lead up to the hearing, you get your packet and you might have a question. I would just encourage you to go ahead and, call us or email us if you have that question. We can try to get an answer for you. If you, during the meeting, you have a question that you feel requires some legal advice, we would turn to the city attorney to provide some guidance on that. In some cases, we've took a recess and kind of talked that over as well during that recess.
So maybe like executive session or something like that? Take a quick
Executive
break?
session, we have to have agenda-sized ahead of time
Okay.
for that.
Okay.
All right, going once, going twice. Any topics for, okay.
Commissioner Gaynor might have one more comment for us. I gotta mess with him. That's all right.
The last question.
No, I love it. Questions are good, right? That's how we learn. Thank you. All right, it's on me. Thank you so much, staff. Thank you so much, Ms. Deaver. We're excited to get into our development workshop series. Since we moved on from item 4R, I'll go ahead and move us to the next agenda item, which will be our call to the public. Are there any requests from the public? I don't see any here. All right. I'm supposed to open this. Open the public hearing. And let's close the public hearing, seeing none. Thank you. Now let's move on to item 8, which will be reports from staff.
Let me just try it again. Our next meeting will be on October 2nd, and so we will have Cody here to talk about wireless facilities as our next topic. We will also have deeper exploration of the actual code language as it applies to middle housing. So that's what we have on the docket for the 2nd. I don't think we have any other cases that night. I think those are the 2 items. But just a couple things to mention in the community. If you haven't been downtown recently, there's a lot of stuff going on. We've got Old Caldwell Barbecue. They've been going vertical west of the old fire station. So that's under construction. It's making a lot of progress. Today we had a groundbreaking for what's going to be called the Jefferson House. So that's the northwest corner of Jefferson and 83rd. That's going to be a great facility. We're all very excited for that. And 2 examples of things that are happening, that are coming out of the ground, and I think are really going to provide a good catalyst for further redevelopment in downtown. Also, I'm sure you've read in the news and you've heard about the city's. We were successful in purchasing 834 acres in North Peoria, what's known as the Peoria Innovation Core. So specifically, this land is located between the 303 and the CAP. Just north of the Loop 303 there. So the larger Peoria Innovation Core is 7,000 acres in size, so it's all state land, everything north of Pleasant Valley, east of the river corridor. And so right now, we are working to put together technical reports and land use documents in support of a filing that we're going to be doing for a planned community district. So a rezone of all 7,000 acres in collaboration with state land. So one of the things I'll commit to in the very near future is bringing back bringing back a status report on the PIC zoning entitlement that we're working on. And as we get that case filed, there will be several touch points that we'll have with the commission as we go forward. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Director Hawkes. Looks like we have all the reports from staff. Let's go ahead and move on to commissioner updates. Commissioners, do we have any updates?
I just have one comment.
Yes.
I just want to thank staff. You guys, what you guys have pulled off over this last year with moving AMCOR, the PIC, the MPG, you guys have moved mountains, and virtually no municipality has the capability of pulling off what you guys have accomplished in this last year. And I just couldn't be more grateful. The vision that was set for this city is taking shape, and I just commend you guys for your efforts and your execution and pulling off what you guys pulled off, because it's candidly unheard of, and Peoria is on the move in a big way thanks to all you folks. So just not me as a commissioner, me as a citizen, sincerely thank you.
Thank you for that. It means a lot.
Thank you, Commissioner Fighter. I would have to agree. We have one of the best planning departments. I'll move on into my report. I was able to be with some of you all. I know Planning Director Hawkes, as well as I know Commissioner Gaynor, who attended as well. We went to the APA conference, which is the American Planning Association State Conference, which was in Tempe this year. So thankful for the city having willingness to have me and Commissioner Gaynor tag along. I really enjoyed it. One of my favorite sessions was the collaborative community building session. And I'm just very excited to see, some of that, what they're teaching across the state come to Peoria. I'm very big on us collaborating with residents, hearing residents, them feeling engaged in the process. And so looking forward to continuing education and all the connections we made there. And I just want to say, you all do this every year. For those who do not know, our planning departments continue to get their education, whether it's getting credits, which they do have to get, they're planners, but they show up. They continue their education, and they're here just serving our city in a great way. So definitely have to agree with some of the comments Commissioner Fighter had. And thank you all. Really enjoyed myself this year.
Madam Chair.
That's all I have. Hop on in, Commissioner Gaynor.
Just quick, thank you also. Thank you for allowing us to participate. It was great seeing you there. It was all of you. It was super cool to represent Peoria at that session. So again, thank you for allowing us to do that. It's kind of unheard of. So thank you.
Thank you. That is all we have for commissioner updates, and seeing no further business, I will now adjourn this meeting. Thank you.